So we're on our way to go see Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Now, I had my issues with Phase 4 feeling like it wasn't focused enough, and I'm really hoping that this movie, by introducing Kang, will give us that focus and that urgency that I felt was lacking over the last couple years of the MCU. Just in general, I'm looking forward to see an Ant-Man movie that they're using to actually kick off a phase of the MCU. So I'm optimistic. I haven't really heard any of the early buzz surrounding what people thought about the film. What are you thinking?
I'm just excited that we are diving right in. I mean, Kang is clearly the big bad for Phase 5 and Phase 6, so let's see how it goes.
So we're gonna watch it, then we'll let you know what we thought about it.
So we walked up to the press table. They gave us our movie tickets. Right there, that little guy right there, plus a magnifying glass so we could see it. What is this? A movie ticket for ants?
What is this?
A center for ants!
All right, I'm sure you're getting antsy to hear what did I think about the movie, but real quick, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Share a small comment on your thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Also, one more thing before we get started. This weekend, I will be at Fan Expo Portland. Actually, Andy's going with me, so Andy will be there as well, but I'll be leading 2 different panels. If you're in Oregon, the Portland area, I'd love to meet you. Details are down below in the description. And let's get started with the good. And I'll kick things off by saying I feel this movie works better as a piece of the MCU than as an Ant-Man movie. I criticized Phase 4 of the MCU for a lack of focus and urgency. This movie really ups the ante. This movie gave me what I felt like Phase 4 was missing, and it does so by introducing the much anticipated Kang. Now, we saw a variant of him in Loki, but this is true Kang the Conqueror. We see the actual threat, the danger, and his character fits in the story that's being told with his connections to the quantum realm, but it also very much sets up, teases the much bigger danger that is out there.
He will burn the world to find you. Who? The Conqueror.
And it just creates a scenario where the stakes feel much larger in this film for itself, as well as creating that danger, that urgency for this set of phases of the MCU. And a big part of that is Jonathan Majors' performance as Kang. And what it does really well is the way the character's written, he's not particularly sympathetic. He's written to be this very aggressive conqueror that's manipulative, that uses information to trick people to get what he wants. But the performance, his eyes, gives him a sympathetic side to him, where he believes in what he's doing. He has a lot going on, and you're not quite sure what everything he's saying means, when he's lying or not. And it all kind of comes down to the little details of his performance. And he's not written to be this super pleasant character, but he does have a specific charm to him in the way that he interacts with people, and a couple of the relationships that are formed. You can see where there would be a trust there with someone, and then he can be terrifying in the next moment. So there's a lot of range in what he's doing, but I feel like there's been a missing piece in the MCU, and that missing piece is now present. Kang the Conqueror, he has arrived.
Kang is an infinite number of different personas. And you need an actor to be able to pull that off.
I'll talk more about this in the mixed section of this review, but this movie and what we learn about Kang complements what we learned about the Kang variants in the multiverse in the show Loki. It kind of fleshes it out. You see different perspectives on information that we learned in that TV show. But clearly, this movie establishes Kang as this permanent threat in the MCU at this point in time. Other big thing to talk about here is that this movie does a tremendous amount of world building, because you truly go into this new world of the quantum realm.
You come from above. Like him.
Where there's all these different creatures, cultures, societies, different rules. And so it has to build all of that out. which once again, we'll talk about some of that in the mixed section. But whereas the previous Ant-Man movies felt very much like just kind of present in the world of the MCU in San Francisco, this one takes you off into this world that you get to explore and see all these different layers to it. Bunch of people in their initial reactions compared this movie to Star Wars. And there's some truth to that, not just because of the world building and the wacky creatures and characters, also due to the nature of the plot and kind of what's going on with Kang and what he's built and how people are responding to him. But I would say it's more like Flash Gordon of the MCU, more so than Star Wars of the MCU, because Flash Gordon in particular, the 1980 movie, has like a campiness, a goofiness to it. That's more what this is like than kind of the more serious tone of Star Wars. Star Wars always had fun, lighthearted, and jokes in it, but there's a lot of goofiness here. So it's more like Flash Gordon. But all that to say, it does kind of build out this world with all these different creatures to explore. To that point of the Star Wars or Flash Gordon comparison, it actually builds to this very epic finale where there's a massive battle that takes place that's much grander than scale than anything in the previous two Ant-Man films. So you think Ant-Man and the Wasp ended with a car chase. This ends with this epic battle on multiple different fronts. And you see some of the more personal aspects of that in the trailers, but there's a bunch of stuff that they kind of held back that it isn't immediately obvious that's in the movie because it is about the quantum realm. Of course, our lead characters are trying to battle Kang for their own purposes, but then there's all this other stuff that ties back into the world building. It kind of just gives it the size to it that you're not really expecting from an Ant-Man movie. The other thing I wasn't really expecting is that there's a couple sequences with some real trippy visual effects that are quite fancy and reminded me of the Mysterio sequences in Spider-Man Far From Home. You can see little glimpses of it in the trailer with the sequence with all the different Ant-Men. It gets pretty wild in what it does in that part in time. So there's just kind of some stuff I wasn't really expecting. There was a little bit more creative flair to it. And of course, as it's an Ant-Man movie, there's no shortage of fun antics. There's a lot of humor thrown in here. The stuff that was in the previous movies related to just, Paul Rudd being effortlessly charming and amusing, but also because you're in this other world, there's all these wild kind of weird creatures. And without wanting to say too much, once you've seen the movie, you'll think about the word holes just a little bit differently, and it'll be a little bit more fun. But there's just a bunch of humor in there, as you'd expect from an Ant-Man movie, that from beginning to end, plenty of solid laughs. So as the kickoff to Phase 5, it did a really good job of introducing the threat that I felt was missing, delivering that urgency, raising the stakes, the grander tension of the MCU as a whole. As a movie in and of itself, I didn't think it was marvelous. So let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. First thing that comes to mind here is that, as I said before, this movie worked much better for me as a piece of the MCU kicking off Phase 5 than it did as an Ant-Man film. The appeal of the Ant-Man films is that they were intentionally small-scale, ant-sized threats. They were family comedies. They weren't swinging for the fences. They were just trying to have a good time, and that's why some of you weren't crazy about them. They just didn't feel all that important to the MCU as a whole. And this movie is a gigantic swing to the flip side of things, where all of a sudden it's this massive story by going small into the quantum realm. It's introducing the big bad, there's gigantic stakes, there's world building, and all that lighthearted charm kind of gets lost in the scope and size of the story that's being told. For some of you, that's why this will easily be your favorite Ant-Man film, is because it is important. It does do a bunch of stuff that matters for the future of the MCU. For me, I felt like we lost something in doing so. It feels just a bit more generic by going bigger and grander and feeling like it has all the spectacle that other movies have. Changing the vibe and tone and scale doesn't make it bad, but it does feel like something got lost in the process. And in this movie, it very quickly gets to the quantum realm. If you've seen the trailers for it, there's not a whole lot more in the real world than what you already see in the trailers. That's a pretty good synopsis summary of what you get in the movie, and then we very quickly end up in the quantum realm, and the movie's only about 2 hours long while doing a bunch of world building, having epic battles, a bunch of cameos, a bunch of jokes. So there's not a lot of time to be in the real world, and I feel something was lost because of that. And even Ant-Man's powers, part of what makes them interesting is being in the normal real world and seeing this guy go very small onto objects that we're familiar with, or seeing him go gigantic in places we're familiar with. And when you put him in this kind of weird, wacky realm, it's not quite as interesting to see him big or small or whatever, because everything is weird and wacky in the quantum realm. A few more things to talk about here. These aren't necessarily good or bad. They're just things that people, I'm sure, will be asking about. First one is about Bill Murray. He isn't a big part of the film. He's kind of important. It's fun to see him. But if you're going like, wow, Bill Murray's joining the MCU, like, it's just kind of a cameo, essentially. It's nice to see him, but that's all it is. Second one on here, do you need to watch Loki before you watch Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania? No, you don't need to, but they complement each other really nicely. And if you watch this and you're like, oh, all that multiverse stuff, Kang, that's really interesting. There's stuff in here that's discussed in like 2 minutes. There's a whole 45-minute episode of Loki dedicated to elaborating on the multiverse and kind of what's going on with Kang. So if you haven't watched Loki yet, you can watch it beforehand, or you can watch it after the movie, and it'll flesh out some of the big important stuff kind of going on within the multiverse and this saga of the MCU. Final thing people always ask me about, of course, with MCU movies, mid and post-credit scenes. We've got a mid-credit scene, we have a post-credit scene. Both of them are worth watching. Both of them are teases for what's coming in the future. They're not like little comedic little zingers or anything like that. They're actual teases related to plot things. The mid-credit one is kind of more in general of something coming in the future and following things up. And then the one at the very end is a more specific tie into an upcoming project. But both of them are worth watching. Both are plot-based. So be on the lookout for those. From there, let's move on to the bad. And the big thing here, this movie has serious tonal issues. Like on a story level, I thought it was pretty cohesive in the way that it ties together what happened to Janet with kind of Kang's introduction here, what's happening with him, the information that we've learned in Loki. It works as a solo story while tying into the bigger things. Cohesive on a story level, but scene to scene, character to character, it feels like two totally different people were telling the story, both in the writing, in the direction, just harsh tonal shifts moment to moment. As I said before, it's not really the Star Wars of the MCU, it's the Flash Gordon of the MCU because it can be so goofy. And you'll have all of these jokes of creatures about holes and all the lighthearted bits that you expect from a Ant-Man movie. It has that vibe of the Ant-Man movies, but then our main villain is a genocidal conqueror that in scenes kills dozens, hundreds of people, and then it'll cut back to a silly joke. And it's just doing that. And Kang is written to be a humorless character. He's a serious, dramatic character, and he's side by side with not just comedic characters, but overtly comic relief characters that are just silly and over the top with nothing to like transition between the two things. They just feel like they're playing in wildly different movies. The ultimate example of this is having Kang and MODOK in the same movie playing scenes together. They don't fit. There's no effort to try and make sense of how they're in scenes together and how they play together. It's just like putting pickles in ice cream. I like ice cream, I like pickles. I don't want the two mashed together. And that is exactly what this feels like. And without getting into too many specifics, like there's a shot in the trailer where Kang walks out angry and shoots beams out of his hand. That is Kang walking out murdering a bunch of people. And very shortly afterwards, we just get the silliest of silly MODOK jokes side by side. And so it just cuts the tension. You have this dramatic character that makes you feel the danger and the tension, and then it cuts to just silly jokes and humor, which is a pretty recurring theme in the MCU. And this movie's kind of one of the classic examples of you gotta dial it back, you gotta pick a tone, otherwise you're undoing the danger, and you're making a character that otherwise might be funny feel out of place because you're mashing them together and they don't go together at all. Did some of this stuff with MODOK make me laugh? Yeah. Did it undermine the dramatic tension? Yeah, it did that too. And also, just in general, I'm not really sure if MODOK translates particularly well to live action if you're not doing it as an overt comedy. In the comics, he's a silly character that looks pretty ridiculous, and with the way they decided to bring him into the MCU, they chose something that made that transition into live action even more difficult. And so as soon as he appears on screen, you're like, I don't know about that. Like, they didn't design a new look for MODOK that might fit into live action. They cast an actor and squished his face into the comic accurate design of MODOK, in which case it's inherently unnatural for the way humans see faces, and the eyes don't feel like they're the right distance apart, and the face doesn't move quite right because it's like squished into this design, and your brain just rejects it. It knows that it's not quite right, and so it just made me uncomfortable. Like, I felt like I was going cross-eyed the whole time that I was watching him. And so, did it make me laugh sometimes? Sure. Did it feel like it fit the movie? No. Especially next to Kang, the two characters just do not go together in one film with these two interpretations. Next one, this one's a little bit tough to go into without going to spoilers, but there's some weird stuff in how they treated Janet's character, her motivation, and her actions in the movie, before the movie and during the movie. It's the second movie in less than 5 years in the MCU where everything takes place over a miscommunication surrounding a powerful thing. And then, in light of where this movie goes, it's just really hard to understand why Janet didn't say certain information sooner.
You're sending a signal down to the quantum realm.
In particular, in light of the post-credit scene in Ant-Man and the Wasp and what they were doing with the technology, the van, and sending Scott Lang into the quantum realm, major plot line in the Infinity Saga. In light of that she was present for, I don't understand what's going on in this movie. Like, I don't know if they forgot about it, if it just didn't match up what they were doing, and so they just had to retcon it a little bit. But her attitude towards the quantum realm in this movie versus what we saw in that very important scene didn't quite line up for me, and that kind of goes throughout this whole film of like, she's written to be evasive because she needs to be evasive for the plot to take place. It just doesn't feel like it makes a ton of sense. And finally, I was not a fan of how Cassie was handled in this film. They want to make her an important part of the story to kind of continue that family dynamic, fathers and daughters, that's been all throughout this trilogy of films.
Cassie Lang wants to change the world. I have a suit.
Yeah, I noticed.
And so she's brought to be a part of the team, but the movie's not about that. It's about Kang, it's about building out the quantum realm. So there's no time to give her a character arc or have her grow and change. So they just make her really good at things. Like right out of the gate, that she knows how to design incredibly complex things without giving a good reason why. And then she knows how to use the Ant-Man tech without it being clear how or when she was really trained to be able to do that. And they're doing this so that they can have a series of moments where her dad's like, oh, Cassie, I am just so proud of you. I love you so much. But none of the moments really feel earned because it's not part of a grander journey of growth and development for her. She's just good at things. And in a different movie that wasn't focused on her things, there's some interesting ideas there of what if she's smarter and more scientific than her dad, so she just drifts away from her dad that she's been close with to hang out with Hank and Hope. That's kind of interesting. Or play off Some of the dialogue from Ant-Man and the Wasp, where Cassie was like, Dad, I can be that person to help you out. And then you make this movie about him training her.
Momentum, right? Jump tap.
I know how to do it, Dad.
Oh, do you?
That's kind of interesting. But the movie doesn't have any time to do that. And so it just has her be way too good at some things. And even is like, has a superior view of moral obligation to help others. And it's like, you gotta develop characters. You have to give an explanation as to why they're so good at things for it to feel earned and for us to be like, yeah, that's cool, as opposed to just like forcing them to be brilliant at everything. So for me, I was very mixed on this film. There's a bunch of things that I loved, and there's a bunch of things that just didn't really work for me. So it's kind of a jumbled pool of feelings about everything kind of going on. My buddy Andy had a bit of a different experience with it. Here's what Andy has said.
So we just got into seeing Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. What'd you think about it?
I thought that Phase 5 is off to a great start. They set a high bar. I mean, this movie had action. I thought the CGI was incredible, especially considering how Phase 4 was. And honestly, it's probably a better multiverse movie than Doctor Strange was. I thought all the family dynamics were very organic. As you can tell from the trailers, Scott feels like he's running out of time, and you also feel this way in the movie. Like, there is a sense of priority. There's a sense of urgency with all the actions being taken in the movie, and that there is, well, clearly a threat coming from Kang himself. It just does a great job, as I said, of setting the tone for the rest of Phase 5 and setting us up with a new big bad.
So we actually sat down here and put like a whole table out, and we're in stools. Doesn't make any sense because we don't have a tripod in front of us to be able to see this, but we have a really nice set if I wasn't holding this with, my hand.
Remember to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know what you thought about Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Also come back this weekend for my spoiler review, my ranking of the Ant-Man films. Gonna have more content coming. Also, if you're in Portland or the Oregon area, I will be leading 2 panels at Fan Expo Portland this weekend, and Andy actually will be there for all of that as well. I would love to meet you. Details are down below in the description. While I didn't fully feel like this was a brilliant film in and of itself, I did enjoy the movie, and I felt that it did work as a piece of the MCU as a whole, that it delivered a piece that I feel has been missing for a while, in particular, the big threat that we've needed to give that urgency and stakes. As an Ant-Man movie itself, I feel like it lost a little bit of its charm and that lighthearted, small-scale vibe. For some of you, that's why you'll like this movie more than the other Ant-Man films. The big issue, though, is I felt the tone was very uneven, where it was just way too silly and jokey in one scene, and then trying to be very serious, dramatic, tension-filled in another, and the two just simply didn't go together. So very much a mixed bag that I had some fun with. Overall, it's a B-. It's a 7 out of 10 on the entertainment scale, and this one is for MCU fans only. Be sure to come back this weekend for more Ant-Man and the Wasp coverage. Also, if you're in the Portland or Oregon area, I'd love to meet you at Fan Expo Portland.
That didn't work very well at all. I was like, I didn't even make it through a word there.